Hello and welcome to the Week 10 episode of the Power Grid. It's the Footballguys.com daily fantasy show, and I'm joined by Jeff Pasquino, Ryan Hester, John Lee, and Devin Knotts, the usual crew here to help guide you through your Week 10 main slate lineup making. So let's jump right into it. We're going to go to Vegas like we always do first each week, and I'm going to talk to John because he does our Tuesday Vegas value chart article. John, what do you see on the Vegas chart this week?
Last year, if I told you that the Los Angeles Rams would have one of the best offenses in the league, how many of you would have said, yeah, I'm holding up the green sign for that? I mean, this team has been incredible this season. What a turnaround getting rid of Jeff Fisher. And this week, they are at the top of the Vegas value chart with an implied team total, 29 points, playing the Houston Texans, who last week, without Deshaun Jackson, just looked defeated. They're 12-point favorites. I think this favors everybody in that offense. Jared Goff continues to shred defenses, and Todd Gurley, we know he's the type of guy that can play all roles. 12-point favorites. They're at home. Seriously favors Gurley. And there are some other very expensive running backs this week who we need to consider in that group. So we'll talk about them in just a bit. Outside of that, we have another big favorite at the top, Detroit against Cleveland. Another home favorite. Not such a strong running game in Detroit. So maybe that favors the passing game and Matthew Stafford. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then New England, Pittsburgh, Atlanta. These guys are all topping the top of the Vegas value chart this week. And I think that there are some select options there. The game of choice of the week, of course, is Atlanta and Dallas. Although I think there are some questions there that is maybe late breaking. And I think we'll break that down a bit more with all the injuries and or suspension news coming out of Dallas this evening being Thursday evening.
Yeah, and I think that Houston, they're missing Deshaun Watson, not Deshaun Jackson. But your point is well made.
If they were missing Deshaun Jackson, though, at quarterback, that would explain a lot of things.
It definitely would. But I think you're right. They did look a mess without their rookie quarterback. Let's see, Jeff, what else do you see in Vegas that stands out to you? John kind of walked us through the top a little bit. What do you see kind of in the middle?
Yeah, in the middle there, I think the one game I'm looking at in the middle that's kind of interesting is the Saints in Buffalo. That's going to be a telling game. I think that it's interesting that the point spread's actually moved down 2 points since it's opened not the spread, but the over-under 48.5 down to 46.5, but it's still a pretty high total, and the spread's only 2.5. So I think that game could be a little bit back and forth. There's definitely some offensive and defensive matches to exploit for both sides. So that could be one of your sneakier shootouts. Another game I think that could be high scoring that I kind of like that has a rather low total, which I think is too low, is the Jets in Tampa Bay. I think the Jets in Tampa Bay could put up some points this week, and that could be interesting, and another sneaky shootout possible there.
Yeah, I think those are good picks. And it's a little bit of a weird week in Vegas in terms of there is only one game that's projected to be 47 points or higher. So you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper than maybe you ordinarily would for finding potential shootout games. There's plenty of high implied total teams, but not as many sort of like close games with high totals. Let's dive into the quarterbacks a little bit, and we'll cover some more Vegas stuff as we go through. Devin, tell me about what you like at quarterback this week, either in cash or GPPs.
Yeah, so I think we're going to talk a lot about saving money this week because at the running back and wide receiver position, there's a ton of great options. But the one guy I'll just throw out there who's my favorite this week is Matthew Stafford. He's a little bit more expensive than some of the other names that we'll get into that some of the other guys will mention. But we mentioned that Detroit has a very high total this week. And Cleveland has the best running defense in football. They're only allowing 2.9 yards per carry. Detroit's running game is an absolute mess with Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick, and their offensive line has been horrible as well. So this is a really good spot, especially if Jabril Peppers plays. So Peppers has been one of the worst safeties in football, and Cleveland plays his own defense a majority of the time. So this is a spot where Marvin Jones, even though he's going to be in a tough matchup against Jason McCourty, don't be scared off of it just because he's not going to be man. It's not going to be man-to-man for most of the game. It's going to be a zone. The Browns have a safety issue with Peppers. They can exploit a deep pass to Jones. We've seen Jones go. He's been unbelievable over the last 4 games, averaging over 100 yards. So this is an offense that is throwing the ball consistently. They're going up against a weak Browns secondary and really should be able to take advantage of it.
And we trust Devin, the Browns fan, when he tells us play all your guys against Cleveland and don't play Cleveland guys.
It's worked every week.
Yeah, that's true. Ryan, let's go to you next on quarterbacks. Who else do you like?
Yeah, on the money saving front, there's some other guys I like. Stafford was definitely one of them. But on the money saving front, since we may need it to jam in some of the studs and good lineups, I like the Tampa Jets game. I like both of those guys. I already have some green black-eyed Joes showing up for me, and I'm not even sure what I'm going to say right now. But I'm actually looking a little bit at San Francisco and the Giants, at those 2 quarterbacks as well. And I like Eli Manning a little bit less, given the fact that team. That's right, both of them. Even C.J. Beathard, who is sub 5K. It's a GPP play, not a cash play, but he's sub 5K on DraftKings. He has 100 rushing yards in 3.5 games and 2 touchdowns, and the Giants don't care. So they gave up 51 points last week, and now they're traveling cross-country in a week where they told reporters that they've given up on their coach. So it's a little narrative streety, but it is, if Beathard starts, I like him against the Giants. These teams play at a fast pace, and there might actually be some points in this game.
Yikes.
So I'll agree on one thing there. I think this game actually could have sneaky shootout potential because both of these offenses run really, really fast. Having my notes, San Francisco is the fastest overall defense in the league, and the Giants are 6th fastest. And if you look at their respective DVOAs, San Francisco 27 and 23rd, and the Giants 26th and 25th in terms of defense. So fast offenses, very bad defenses. I'll buy into the premise that this could be a high-scoring game, but I can't get behind C.J. Beathard because I've not seen anything out of him yet this season. I think this is a Carlos Hyde, Eli Manning, and Sterling Shepard game. I think Sterling Shepard is an excellent play this week, and we'll talk more about wide receivers in a bit. So I'm beating to the punch, but I do agree that this game could be kind of sneaky there, Ryan.
Well, and let me clarify. I blurred the line there from cash to GPP real quick and kind of glossed over it and buried the lead. But I'm not starting him in cash games. I'd much prefer a Stafford or even a Jared Goff in that format. But it's somebody that clearly won't be touted all week based on the reactions of you four. So
could this be, the numbers are lying to you a little bit because both teams trail so much. They're in hurry-up offenses. So they have to run a lot of plays that way.
It is, however, some of the numbers I was quoting overall, but I generally look at, and I did look at, this is in neutral situations. Yeah. They still run very, very fast offenses.
They both are fast neutral. Even though San Fran changed coaches, it's the same San Fran as last year, in that they play really fast and they're really bad. So
nice. Same old Niners. Jeff, talk to us about some quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think the one big decision on both sites, or probably almost all of them as I looked through all of them, is are you willing to go down and trust Ryan Fitzpatrick? That's really the question on cash. And I'm on the fence. On the one hand, he's a veteran. So when I go to a backup quarterback, if he's a veteran, I'm more willing to trust him. But quarterbacks can offer negative points. I think you've got, his top wide receiver target is going to be suspended in Mike Evans. You have some bad matchups for Deshaun Jackson potentially. It's tricky, but if there's one position you can afford to go down and what it affords you to build a better lineup all the way around, I think I could get behind it. The other quarterbacks I'm looking at that keep popping up when I do my build so far, and I know it's still early, but Matt Ryan and Dak Prescott. Those are the two guys that keep popping up. And I would trust Prescott a lot more considering Zeke's out. I think that's going to be more of a one-man band. But I don't know if I could trust Matt Ryan just because I can't trust the Atlanta offense right now. I think that we need to talk a little bit about Matt Ryan and Julio Jones later on in the show and how much trust we can get behind those guys. But those are 3 quarterbacks that I'm looking at a lot. I think I'm leaning towards Fitzpatrick now, but Dak is definitely in there, and so is Stafford. I think both those guys are up there for my cash.
Yeah, and Stafford, for those of you listening to the audio version, Stafford got a very positive green black-eyed Joe reaction from, I think, everybody on that. I like Fitzpatrick this week, and if it had been any other week, I think I'd be putting him in cash. But what I'm realizing is that I feel like the pricing feels soft this week because there are so many injury situations and suspension situations that are opening up value that I don't feel like I need to go down to Fitzpatrick in cash. But, I think there's an argument to be made for using him if you really want to cram in a ton of top cost players. John, you didn't really share a whole lot of your QB picks. Let me go back to you and get a couple from you again.
That's because I don't want to share anything this week. I'm keeping it all to myself.
You've got it figured out how to get all the monies.
That's right. No, I mean, in fairness, I think most of my thoughts have already been shared. Stafford is probably the top pick if you can get him into your lineup. I built a few cash game lineups before we went live this evening. And Fitzgerald is in a lot of them. I think Fitzgerald is entirely playable against Tampa Bay's secondary. Every time I say that, I think I'm messing up because
Fitzpatrick.
You mean Fitzpatrick?
Against
the Jets secondary?
I did mess it up. See,
every time I say Jackson.
It really messes me up because he's playing against his former team.
He's playing against his former team every week. He's played for so many teams.
Every time John messes up a name, take a drink.
So you do like Fitzpatrick. You're finding him in a lot of your lineups.
I do, and I'll tell you why. Because we'll talk more about game strategy as the show goes on. But in cash games, I think you have to get a couple of these high dollar running backs because they're both very, very good. And I'm talking about Gurley and Bell. These are the guys that I want in my cash game lineups this week. And Devin, I love you, brother. You're tilting some days, but I love you. That said, I think that you have to have a cheap quarterback, and for me, that's the way that I'm going. And there's really not. I'm actually very excited to hear who you guys love so much at the high end of things for wide receivers, because for me, I don't think that there's a whole lot to like at the upper end of wide receivers this week. And so what that's enabling me to do to build out my lineups is to go low wide receiver, high running back, low quarterback, and then high on the tight ends. And we'll talk about how that all works out. But for me, I think it's Stafford if you can afford him, Fitzpatrick on the low end, and then GPPs. I don't know that anybody mentioned him, but I think Tom Brady against Denver. Denver decimated last week by Carson Wentz. They're coming off of a bye week. Of course, we can't get this on DraftKings main slate because it's a night game. But Brady, I think he'll be under-owned because of the reputation of the Denver defense. But I'm not going to let that scare me away from him this week. I think it's a decent matchup, and Denver is really struggling right now.
I would argue that Tom Brady might be a better cash game play than Matt Stafford this week at similar prices on FanDuel. With I don't buy into that Denver defense very much. Obviously, you can't play him on DraftKings main slate.
Why? Because they gave up 4 touchdowns last week.
They still
held Carson Wentz to 199 yards passing.
It's true.
That's because
it's not like they're that bad.
The defense kept putting the ball on the 20. You're not going to get a lot of yards when the ball's on the 20.
And I don't think
rocket ship exploded.
The rocket ship exploded.
Yeah, on the launching pad.
I don't think Carson Wentz is as good as Tom Brady, so I may roll with that in cash on FanDuel.
Can I have some of that?
You're always looking for that. There's one other quarterback we didn't mention. I think we'll talk about him a little bit more.
Blake Bortles.
Yeah.
277 yards per game over his last 3. Same price as Fitzpatrick. Why not?
Austin, are you going to say Andy Dalton?
No, I was going to say Ben Roethlisberger. We haven't talked about
Yeah.
Large Benjamin, and he's facing a weak Colts defense. So I like Roethlisberger a lot in GPPs. I think that we'll be talking about Antonio Brown when we get to wide receivers. So we'll move on and talk more about that situation in our receiver situation. Yeah, the one high-priced wide receiver I see.
The only.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see if we all agree on that, but I think I'm on board with that take. Let's talk about running backs. It came down today that Ezekiel Elliott is suspended, and I think it's going to stick this week and for multiple weeks. So don't play Ezekiel Elliott. We can talk about whether we like any of these other Dallas running backs. I do not. Matt Forte did not practice on Thursday. To me, this is the most interesting injury of the week. He's looking doubtful to me. And I think Bilal Powell is a great value across the board. I have a feeling he'll be very highly owned in cash games this week.
Could be the highest owned player on DraftKings.
Yeah, that would not surprise me. At only 4,000 on DraftKings, that's a huge way to save money in your lineup. And then if you're playing Sunday Night Football, FanDuel slate, CJ Anderson did not practice on Thursday due to illness, but he's also dealing with some knee stuff. So just keep an eye on that if you care about the Broncos running game, which I kind of don't because it's a three-headed monster there. All right, let's move into these running backs. Ryan, tell me about the running backs you like this week other than Bilal Powell.
Yeah, it kind of, outside of the Bilal Powell news, it kind of begins with Le'Veon Bell, and then it becomes let's look for our RB2. The Steelers run the ball very much on the road. We know Roethlisberger's home road splits are a real thing. I, as a Steeler fan, tend to think that's very much coaching and game plan driven more so than player driven. And Bell's home road stats are basically almost the inverse of Roethlisberger's. So I think in a game that they should control where they're a double-digit favorite against a team who gives up yards via the run and I believe lost a defensive lineman last week. I can't recall his name right now. Maybe you guys can help me out. But they've been giving up yards regardless, and it's going to be a positive game script, and we know what Bell can do in the passing game as well. So for me, I'm going to pay for the opportunity and the matchup despite the high price, and that's where I'm starting, and I'll leave the rest to these other guys.
Yeah, Powell and Bell are my top two cash running backs right now. Devin, you held up the red black-eyed Joe.
Yeah,
you do not like Bell.
No, it had everything to do with Ben's home road splits. He's actually been he's been phenomenal in domes throughout his career. So they're indoors this week. So it's actually a pretty intriguing matchup, even though that they are on the road.
Let me ask you. Go ahead, Ryan.
One thing real quick, because I think that the home road splits is a little bit more narrative than true. And I mention it more in a way of how people are going to think and assess the game more so than my own kind of personal analysis. So Ben did throw, I think, 3 touchdowns against Indy last year at Indianapolis. So I'm definitely not scared of the Steelers passing game either. I just think if they are passing, Bell's also going to be a part of that. So he's still the right play.
That makes sense. Devin, let's go back to you. Running backs this week. Now, are you looking to pair, say, Bell and Powell, or do you have 2 high-priced guys that you're going to put together here?
Well, every lineup I'm building this week starts with Leonard Fournette. So the Chargers' run defense this season has been the absolute worst in football, allowing 120 yards per game to opposing running backs and 135 yards rushing per game. This is a defense that's set up to basically stop the pass, and I jokingly said Blake Bortles, but don't actually do that because the Leonard Fournette may have 30 carries, probably will have 30 carries this week. He was suspended last week. I don't think that they're going to come back and limit him in any way. I think it was teaching their best player a lesson. They need to win this game. They need to win basically all their games as they're in a tight conference race. This is a spot where I'm basically all in on Leonard Fournette and trying to do everything I can to get him in my lineup.
Yeah, I like Fournette a lot this week. I've got some lineups with Fournette and Bell at the top if I'm spending up on 2 guys. Jeff, tell me about the running backs you like.
Well, I'm a dissenting opinion on Bell. I think he costs too much and he's not getting enough targets. So I think that the game, and also the Colts are going to try and slow that game down and dominate time of possession if they can. That's pretty much been their game script last few weeks. And with Juju Schuster now getting a lot of targets now, I think that a lot of the targets are going away from Bell. So I think that there's better ways to spend your money at running back this week. And I also kind of like, if you favor Antonio Brown, it's another reason to get off Bell. So I like Fournette number one. I think Powell is probably number two in cash if he starts. I think Todd Gurley is definitely in play, and so is Melvin Gordon. I think all those guys are up there on my list, and Jordan Howard too. So there's too many names to actually throw out there. That's why I'm like, Fantasy Draft is a great site this week where you can start 4 running backs. You got to remember that in a week like this. But Yahoo and DraftKings offer the flex, so you can get 3 running backs in there. And if you want 3 guys that are a little bit priced up, or you want to get better wide receivers and see how your build goes, putting Bell in there, especially on DraftKings, I think he's 9,200. That's 27, 28 points to make cash value. That's asking a lot for a guy that's seeing, I think, 10 targets the last 3 weeks. So that's why I'm going away for him. I think Fournette's poised to go in a big game. The Jacksonville Chargers game should be one of the fastest games from start to finish because both teams are going to run. At least they should. The Chargers may get stupid and throw the ball. I don't know why, but they tend to do that. But the smart thing for both those teams is to get both running backs in play. That's why I like both running backs there.
I'll say one more thing about Bell is that Bell is not that. When I look at running backs, the price difference between Bell and the next closest running back compared to Antonio Brown and the next closest receiver, Antonio Brown to me is light years ahead of the next closest receiver. And not to get into receivers, we'll get into that in a minute. But for me, I'm looking at one player who's in a he might be at the top of the running back tier, but there's other players in that tier as well. So that's why I'm off of Bell. I think he's in a great matchup, but for me, it has everything to do with lineup construction. John, let's hear your take. You flashed the green, red, I want to talk symbol.
Yeah, I mean, are you? I'm the only one who has a beer with me, but I think you guys have been drinking too much. If you're telling me that you don't think Le'Veon Bell is getting enough opportunity, and I know you were using the word targets, so that's fair. But the guy I'm looking at his he's got 92 touches in the running game over the past 3 games. 92. Yeah, that's crazy.
That's why he's lacking targets. They're just handing him the ball the whole time in positive game scripts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I 92. If you give me 30 touches a game, I'll pay 9,800 or whatever he is, 98 and 9,400 for that every week. The thing about Brown is, and I have nothing against Antonio Brown. I agree with what Devin said, but even on a great game, he's going to see half the number of targets that aren't quote touches as Bell. I don't really understand.
Every touch is worth 10 yards for Brown compared to Bell.
And a catch on some sites.
On DraftKings. Because it's a catch. So every catch is 10 extra yards. So if he has 8 catches, that's 80 yards to start off the day.
And how many catches do we think he's going to get?
I would say 7 to 8.
Okay.
But even in these positive games, Bell has 3, 3, and 2, and so now we're 5 different, right? So
how many times has Bell hit 3x on DraftKings over these weeks with lots of touches?
You don't need to hit 3x when you're 10,000. I mean, that's the whole premise of H value, and we can talk about that maybe next week when we have some more time to talk about it. But if he gets 25 points, that's 2.5x. I'm more than happy with that because I think there are guys at the lower end who are going to get more than 3x to compensate for it. But I'm actually incredulous at this line of thinking, and maybe I'm making a bigger deal of it than it is. But the guy to me is the cash game play that you need, and I have at least one, if not 2 people saying no, you don't need him this week. I don't know.
I look at Fournette I look at Fournette and you save money, and he's going to get a similar amount of target, a similar amount of carries.
I'll probably have both.
So I'm playing the role of I guess I'm John Knotts this evening, but I'll even go to that end. I pointed out last night on the Roto Grinders show that I really think that Fournette is interesting this week because what was it, 3 weeks ago I think he was injured. 2 weeks ago they had a bye week. Last week he was suspended, so he hasn't played in a month. We know this guy has fresh legs, and we also know that on paper the Chargers are not very good against the run. But if you actually look at what the Chargers have done over the past month, they've actually secured their defensive front 7 quite a bit over the past 4 to 5 games. I think they're allowing about a yard less per carry over the past month compared to their season-long average. To me, that's a little bit scary because I think that this game, this Jacksonville Chargers game, could be a low-scoring game. Again, completely crazy. Maybe I'm wrong. I am the guy, as Ryan pointed out, that called the Denver Broncos upset victory last week that didn't happen. So maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I do think that this Chargers Jacksonville Jaguars game has sneaky low-scoring potential.
Giants, Raiders, Broncos, Patriots. Last 4 games for the Chargers.
Okay.
Just saying, that's a not great running back, so I'm not afraid of it. I look, if you want to play Bell, go for it. I think he's in a great spot. I'm just saying I think that Fournette's upside is equal to Bell, and I would rather use that money to find a way to get Brown in my lineup. That's all I'm saying.
And I'm somewhere in the middle, leaning more towards Devin, where that I think that it comes down to roster construction. If you can fit Bell, it's not a bad play, but there are other just as good plays on a point per dollar valuation for 4 to 5 other running backs that it depends on the rest of your build.
So Jeff, if you're talking about squeezing in Bell, so are you not playing Brown either? Because that's a $300 difference. So it's one or the other, isn't it? Or is it neither?
Are you talking about Antonio Brown?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking to get Antonio Brown. I'm looking to pay up more at wide receiver.
Right. So you'd rather do that.
Right. So it depends on where my wide receivers land. The rest of my lineup running backs may be the spot I fill in last.
I think there's more. I agree with Devin and this is a good segue, Austin. I'm trying to help us move along. 2 wide receiver. I agree with Devin that from top to second, third, there's a bigger gap at wide receiver. But I also think that there's a whole big middle and low end of wide receivers that you can get in that you can't do at running back. So I'd rather take a 4K wide receiver and pay up at running back.
Orleans Darkwa and Bilal Powell.
and I was going to mention Orleans Darkwa because I think he's a good GPP pivot off of Powell, who's going to be much higher owned this week. There's a couple other guys on my list here that I want to get a quick Black Eyed Joe thing on. I don't want to discuss it too much because we got to move on to wide receivers, but a couple of guys we haven't really talked about. Todd Gurley, I feel like we haven't talked a ton about this week. Let's see Black Eyed Joes. If you like Todd Gurley more, show me green. If you like Leonard Fournette more, show me red. Okay, so Devin and I are on Leonard Fournette, and the other 3 guys like Todd Gurley. I don't want to dig into that one too much. I just want to give our viewers a little bit more guidance because there's a lot of great running back options. Did we talk at all about LaShawn McCoy? I feel like we talked about him a lot on last night's show. John, you still like him as a GPP play, is that correct? Let me see Black Eyed Joes. Who likes McCoy this week as a GPP play? We've got 3 greens. Jeff is not on board with this. I don't like McCoy in cash, but it sounds like he might be a good pivot in GPPs. Be sure to check Steve Buzzard's ownership reports that we have over at Footballguys, because if McCoy's ownership gets low enough, I think that makes him a more appealing GPP play. I think he's right around 15% on Steve's lists right now. Ryan, yes.
I think real quick before we move, we should mention Jordan Howard is 6,100 on DraftKings at home in a game that he's favored, and he gets at least 18 carries every game.
Yep, I have him even on my cash list, not at the top, and I probably won't play him in cash, but I think he's that middle price point guy that I like. And
fantasy draft.
Yeah, fantasy draft. There you go. And I think Carlos Hyde is worth looking at as well this week. He's not high on my list, but someone worth talking about in GPPs. Let's look at wide receivers. There's a lot of injury situations here that we're watching closely. Mike Evans got suspended, so we got to look at those Tampa Bay receivers a little bit. Julio Jones didn't practice Thursday. Neither did Des Bryant on the other side of the ball in that high-scoring game. T.Y. Hilton was a weird late addition to the injury report, and so he was in limited practice today. So keep an eye on that. He's probably fine, but just keep an eye on it. And then Zay Jones is looking doubtful, didn't practice Thursday. Maybe that opens up some interesting GPP cheap options there in Buffalo. If you got Sunday Night Football on your radar for FanDuel, Chris Hogan is looking like he's not going to play this week for the Patriots. He didn't practice Thursday with a shoulder injury. And Demaryius Thomas looks like he's going to go, but just keep an eye on that for that Sunday Night Football game as well. John, I wanted to go to you first on wide receivers. Paint a picture of where you're going with your wide receiver picks this week.
It's my least favorite position this week. Don't like a whole lot of anything. I do agree with the fellas that Antonio Brown is probably the guy that if you're spending money, he's the guy you want to go after. That said, if I just went off on a tangent about how much I like Le'Veon Bell, I don't think that you can justify basically spending anywhere from 40% to on DraftKings to a third on FanDuel of your money on Steelers. So in cash games. So I think that you kind of got to make a stand, and I think Jeff may have to interject here after I'm finished. But for me, I'm spending down. So if I'm avoiding Antonio Brown in cash, who am I looking at? None of these guys make me excited, but the guys I'm looking at, Cowboys, cheap receivers, because I think Des Bryant being injured makes me look at a guy like Terrence Williams, Cole Beasley even. These are two guys that are at least in consideration. I haven't made any, obviously, final lineups, and I'm not entirely comfortable with any of them. Adam Humphries is going to be really popular this week at 3,100 for Tampa Bay because of the Mike Evans suspension. And maybe a couple guys at the higher end. I'll give you two more. Sterling Shepard. I think this is a week where we can get away from Evan Ingram because San Francisco is really tough against the tight end position. They've been leaning very, very heavily on him. And I think this is the week that his price point has gotten too high and his matchup has gone too bad for me to go after him. So Shepard's got a really good personnel matchup against Quan Williams out of the slot. I think all the pieces are there for him, and he's still relatively cheap coming off of his injury there a few weeks back. Outside of that, maybe I'll save my other guy for a stack, but yeah, I'll ditch it off to Jeff to talk about his cash game implications if you want to get both of those Steelers into your lineup.
Well, this is going back to like something that Doug Drennan did a long time ago, where he was like, "Do you want to back to the old days of drafting for your regular season? Do you want to combine running backs and wide receivers on the same side? Does that help or hinder your performance? It raises the combined floor." So, and just looking back real quick, just between last year and this year, there have been 4 games at least that I saw where Bell and Brown had 90 yards. So there are definitely opportunities. I would not discount taking both because I think you're taking arguably the top wide receiver and if possibly the top running back as well. So it's a high floor, and you have, again, as I mentioned last week, a better implied chance of getting those touchdowns because those are the two main ball touchers, to say it very weirdly.
The one counter argument to that is basically everyone in cash will have one of Bell or Brown. So basically you're canceling your lineups with about 50% and a 50-50 because Drennan's article was basically about season long because you're the only person that has those two. The problem is that basically you've basically canceled your edge against half the field in both. That's the only counter argument.
But sometimes you're not looking for the edge. You're just looking to make sure you're not losing ground. So you can make the argument that 75% of the competition you've got covered by at least one share.
I think it's possible because with this pair in this matchup. But I would say like 2 years ago in cash games, I might have been okay with having a higher floor. I feel like the cash lines and the competition and the pricing has gotten softer since 2 years ago in DFS. That I can't only look at that high floor anymore. It's bitten me before where
if you're gonna do it, start Roethlisberger. You just have to go all in on Steelers at that
just
point.
Go all the way in.
If you're gonna go Bell and Brown, you have to go Roethlisberger in cash.
Well, and the other thing to Devin's point about everybody's going to have one of them, if you have both of them, everybody's going to have Adam Humphries and everybody's going to probably have Bilal Powell. And so now you're down to a 9 person roster down to 5 basically.
Yep.
And if you do your research and do your due diligence, you can beat people in a 5v5, but it's a little tougher than a 9-man roster.
I got to be honest. I like the weeks like the previous 2 weeks where I feel like the pricing is tighter. I prefer playing that than a week like this where I feel like I've got so many options that I have trouble narrowing it down, or there's a few obvious picks that sort of narrow me in on a particular lineup. Who else wants to talk about some wide receivers? Let's see. Ryan, have you given us some wide receivers yet? Why don't we pitch it to you and get some wide receiver thoughts?
Yeah, from cash perspective, we talked Humphries, we talked Antonio Brown. If you're not into Humphries and you think a guy like Deshaun Jackson might see more targets in Tampa, he's a viable play, but he's not a cash game type of, he's not a cash game profile type of player. So GPP side, I like Sammy Watkins a little bit. Houston's been getting scorched on deep balls for a couple straight weeks, and Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp see more targets than Watkins, but they see them a lot shorter on the field. And I also like DeAndre Hopkins in the same game, running it back. I mean, his targets, the quality of them went down last week, but the quantity of them didn't. And, Tom Savage got thrown in on Friday with 1 day of practice. I mean, bad as he is and bad as he was in that game, he had 1 day of practice to prepare for it. Maybe with a full week, he's a little bit more competent, and DeAndre Hopkins is still seeing a lot of balls go his way, and people are going to be scared off to play him. So that's a decent correlation. I know we're going to talk stacks later, but there's a good correlation play in that game with those guys.
Yeah, I mean,
we
Hopkins
did say
is
the
certainly.
same thing.
What's
Sorry,
that? Mm-hmm.
We did say the same thing about Brett Hundley. In fairness, right?
That eventually he'll come around, or
that he didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare, and he would be better after a week's of practice. And we saw what he did on Monday night. So I don't know. I mean, Savage had all preseason. I can't get behind the Hopkins. We talked about this a little bit last night, as Austin knows. I'm staying away from Hopkins. The price is too high, and I just what it is Demaryius Thomas all over again. Very talented receiver, nobody to get him the ball.
Yeah,
it's still 16 targets last week, and he has scored at least 1 touchdown in 5 straight games. So that's a little bit of anti-Demaryius Thomas on the touchdown stuff, even though that is admittedly hard to predict.
4 of the games were the real quarterback.
That's fair. One last week though.
So you're saying there's a chance. Let me mention one other guy, and then we'll move on to tight ends. Looking at the Minnesota game, I think Adam Thielen is in play for GPPs. Stephon Diggs draws the tougher matchup in this. Usually plays the majority of his snaps on the Josh Norman side of this. And so Thielen, I think, is a good GPP play. Jeff, you had a comment?
Yeah. I just think there's two things that we need to throw out real quick before we run away from this topic, if we can. Sure. We didn't touch on Julio Jones. I just want to get a general opinion on that. And also, I think we like the Detroit passing game. We talked a lot about that. Which wide receiver do you want? You want Tate, or do you want Marvin Jones?
Yeah, I would say
Starvin Marvin.
Yeah, I would say with Julio and Dez both, I'm concerned about either of these guys playing a decoy role if they're active, and I want no part of either one of them. Devin, give me your take on the Detroit pass catchers. You want Marvin Jones.
I do. So Brian Body Calhoun out of the slot has actually been one of, if not the best corner, and I know Jason Cordy's been very good for Cleveland, but Calhoun has been very, very solid. So that worries me a little bit. And then if Jabril Peppers is playing, I am all in on Marvin Jones. I can't express how bad Peppers has been. I've already taken enough time to talk about him on this show, but yeah, Marvin Jones has more deep touchdown potential than Tate, so I'm in on Jones.
Makes sense to me. Let's talk tight ends. There's really 2 injuries I'm watching here, really one. I mean, it's Jordan Reed. He had limited practice Wednesday and Thursday. He's got a hamstring injury, but that's a tough matchup against Minnesota. I feel like all of these injury situations are paired with a tough matchup, so they kind of don't matter. Let's just move into the plays. John, who you playing at tight end?
I'm going cheap this week. I think Garrett Celek is who I'm going to go with this week. He's the site minimum on both of the major sites, 2,500, 4,500 respectively. Goes up against the New York Giants defense that I believe, going back to Ryan Hester's way of thinking, if you're giving up touchdowns, that's a good thing. I believe that the Giants have given up 8 touchdowns over the past 8 games to tight ends. So for me, it's 9. I knew I could rely on Ryan for this. 9 touchdowns over the past 8 games to opposing receivers or tight ends, excuse me.
9 times.
9 times.
That's a niner.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the way I'm going to go. I'm saving salary. I think that if you're not going that way and you're not comfortable, Jacoby Brissett has really been leaning on Jack Doyle throughout the season. The thing is, his price is really starting to get up there. It's 5,200 on DraftKings, 6,100 on FanDuel. I just don't want to spend that type of money on a non-elite tight end. So for me, I think it's Garrett Celek, and I'll just ride that train and hope for the best.
I've actually got Jack Doyle on my fade list. I've got a few other guys I like in that same price range.
Doyle
Jeff,
rules.
Doyle rules. Jeff, tell me who you got at tight end.
There's a lot to choose from this week, and it really, again, it comes down to price points. I think I like Gronkowski against Denver because they're terrible against the tight ends. We saw that last week. We saw that pretty much every week. I think Kyle Rudolph is definitely one I'm looking at for against Washington. I do like the Thielen call you mentioned earlier, but I think that's a great pick. And one of the cheaper ones I'm looking at, and I think that's going to be a GPP option, and that ties back to my Saints-Bills scoring a lot of points, is Charles Clay. If he's out there and he's active, I really like him because so does Tyrod Taylor, and Taylor plays better at home. So that's a guy I'm really watching this week.
Yeah, it looks like Charles Clay is going to be back this week, limited practice Wednesday and Thursday. It's a tough matchup against New Orleans, but he's a strong tight end. Devin Knotts, tell me who you like at tight end.
Just add on Rudolph. He has 7 targets in each of his last 4 games, 7 or more targets in each of his last 4 games.
Yep.
Starting to become Christmas season. Christmas music is playing. Rudolph is in. Anyway, I had to throw that out there. I
Never
know
gets old.
I know
it's
that's
Christmas.
a
Make a Rudolph
controversial
joke.
I know Christmas music's controversial this time of year, but I had to throw it out there. Evan Ingram is a guy who I really like. A lot of people are going to be scared off of San Francisco, but don't be. They've allowed a touchdown in each of the last 3 games to tight ends, and over their last 4 games, they're allowing 68 yards and 6 receptions. So they were very good early. Looks like they're starting, like the rest of their defense, to really start to unravel. Their rushing defense started off great. It has now turned into the league worst. I think we're going to start seeing that against the tight end as well, and we've already started to see signs of it. So Ingram is going to go overlooked, but I don't think he should.
For those of you watching the audio version, Ryan likes Ingram, and John, Jeff, and I all flashed the red black-eyed Joes on Ingram there. Let's see. Any other tight ends you guys want to mention before I scoop up a few of these last ones? Yes, Jeff.
I know we say did not take any Cleveland players, but David Njoku is getting a lot of targets lately, and I think Detroit is not good against tight ends, and he's slight minimum on FanDuel as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of cheap options there. The couple of guys I like up towards the top, Kyle Rudolph is at the top of my cash list right now. I'm also looking at Delaney Walker and Cameron Brate. I feel like these guys both have decent matchups. I think the concern with Brate is, do you trust Fitzpatrick to get him the ball enough? But I think Walker could be an interesting option here. If you're not going to use him in cash, I think he's worth thinking about in GPPs. Let's move on to defenses and kickers. John doesn't want to talk about defenses and kickers. Jeff does. What about you guys, Ryan or Devin? Show me the black-eyed Joe. You got any? No. Oh, Devin's got one he wants to talk about. All right, Devin, we'll go to you first, and then Jeff will play cleanup.
We're going back about a year. Matt Bryant. He's back. He's back. The highest projected scoring total of the game of the week. When I'm looking at kickers, I'm looking at in Mike Nugent's going to be popular, but I don't really like him this week. I look at red zone efficiency. How many teams are scoring targets in the touchdowns in the red zone? Which the Cowboys are one of the best teams in the red zone. The Falcons really aren't, and we've seen Matt Ryan regress back to his normal self where he doesn't throw touchdowns. So Matt Bryant is my top kicker this week. Chicago Bears are my top defense. They are drastically underpriced on FanDuel at 4,300, going against Brett Hundley, and we've seen that the Bears have a tendency to create a lot of turnovers. So also interesting, the Browns are 3,500, and I haven't seen a defense that cheap all year. So in a GPP with trying to save money, you could do worse. Stafford has these games where he throws these weird interceptions, and 3,500, you don't really have to do that much. You need a couple sacks and Myles Garrett's back. So You could do worse.
Friends don't let friends start Browns. What do you got, John?
I wasn't paying attention because we're on kickers and defense, and all of a sudden I think I heard
you did
for the first time all season. Devin recommends a Browns player. In this case, the Browns defense.
Not just 11.
Let's go back. Let's go back. I think it was like 3 years ago on Draft Street, which doesn't exist anymore. And I think it was the Jaguars or the Jets were like $1 against the Patriots. They were like $1 against the Patriots.
Yep.
And they had, I believe they had like 10 points. So you could do, I mean, the Browns with Myles Garrett, he could have a couple sacks and a turnover. And if they score a touchdown, you're winning like all the money. So why not?
You call CJ Beathard thin, and you're recommending the Browns defense.
Defense is the most volatile position, and John will disagree with me, but it's entirely touchdown dependent on a quarterback throwing an out that he shouldn't, and it's returned to the house.
And quarterback is a predictable position, and Beathard's playing a fast game against a bad defense. All right, go ahead. Well, let's move on.
I'm just glad you patched things up with Matt Bryant. I was sad to see that connection disappear this season, and it warms my heart that you guys are back together. Jeff,
one more thing real quick. If they weren't 3,500, if they were 41, 42, the lowest price on the board, I'm out. But at 3,500 in a GPP only as a dart, why not?
Yep. We all disagree. Jeff, what do you got?
All right, just from a game theory perspective, I think that I don't like the Browns call because if people are scrambling, they're going to go for the cheapest one, so that they're going to be higher owned than they should be. And also the Bears are definitely the lock that everybody's going to be using this week. You could fade them and hope that the Bears don't have a great performance, but there's an opportunity cost there for $700 difference like it is on FanDuel, maybe $800. And that's 1.6 points on cash. That's not even worth looking for. So Chicago's your cash defense on every site. I checked them all. It's definitely the Bears. Tournaments, you could pick any of the others except for the Browns because they'll be lesser owned. I think you got Detroit. I think you have the Rams. And I like the Jaguars. And I also like the Patriots on Sunday night because their rocket ship is going to implode again. So, and the kicker, I looked at all the kickers and all the teams that applied for 24 points, and I even went a little bit further to Dallas. But every kicker is 4,800 or up. And I'm going with Nugent because the Dallas red zone efficiency is based on Ezekiel Elliott, and he's not there anymore. So they're going to stall out in the red zone, and Nugent's going to be getting at least 3 field goal attempts. I think he gets 10-plus points. That's the kicker I'm using this week.
Bold.
And also, if Des Bryant's not at full health, that hurts their red zone chances.
It also helps if you use a Dallas player. It raises your floor.
Cool. Well, that's
enough about kickers and defense.
Dallas versus Atlanta kicker match.
No subject is safe on this show.
No, exactly. Every subject's going to get a red flag. All right, guys, let's talk about stacks. We've got some stacks. We'll try to go through this a little bit quicker. I want maybe 2 stacks from you guys. Has no stacks, I think is what he's saying there.
I've mentioned all of them.
All right, great. John, who's your stack?
All right, I'll take mine and Devin's.
Of course.
I will gift it to you, John, because I'm so nice.
Thank you, Devin. I appreciate it. I really like stacking a game stack in the Steelers Colts. I like Le'Veon Bell, as we talked about earlier, and I think stacking up Jacoby Brissett with T.Y. Hilton again. I'm not a believer in this Pittsburgh Steelers secondary. They've not been tested all year. I've gone on record in saying it when they see, quote, a real quarterback. I'm not sure that Jacoby Brissett is that guy, but I do know that he's cheap enough. And T.Y. Hilton last week showed us what he's capable of when he's not being keyed on by a top-end cornerback. And certainly I don't think that the Steelers have that. So that's one. And in the other, I'll make it quick. I love Cooper Kupp this weekend against Buster Skrine there in the Jet in New York. He allowed Zay Jones to finally become relevant in week, 10 last week. I think that Jared Goff to Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, big red zone target, a lot of red zone targets all season. He's another guy that I think you can look at.
Second most in football red zone targets.
There you go.
Nice. Yeah, that was week 9 last week. This week's week 10. Ryan, what do you got?
Well, I talked about the Giants-Niners game enough earlier, so there's a lot of options there. You could make a heck of a lineup with both Steelers in it if you wanted, if you start C.J. Beathard and Garrett Celek in it as well. But more high-end, more kind of a cash plus thing on FanDuel to follow your lead, Austin, from earlier is Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. Denver allows almost half of their total points via passing touchdowns. They allow only 9% of their points via rushing touchdowns. And tight ends are targeted against them on a percentage basis more than any team in the league. We talked about that a little bit last week, and that's why we talked about Zach Ertz forever, and that's why Trey Burton became a good play at his low price when Ertz got hurt. So Brady and Gronk, it'll also be a little bit contrarian, even on a site like FanDuel where pricing is looser because people may not want to pay up at the quote-unquote onesie positions. So if you have Brady Gronk in there, you probably don't have either of the two big Steelers, which might set you apart from the crowd.
I like it. Jeff, tell me about your stacks.
Yeah, I definitely want to second what John said and say that, I was on saying the Pittsburgh defense was overrated when I called Matthew Stafford for a couple weeks ago, but John doesn't listen to me because I talk kickers too much, so I'm not surprised. So the stacks I want to hit, two quick stacks. The Bears, Jordan Howard, I pair them. Well, I think that's a good option. And I think that going back to the Saints and Buffalo game, I like Drew Brees in that he's going to be very low owned. And a lot of people are going to go with Mike Thomas, but I would not be afraid at all of using Alvin Kamara. I think that he's seeing a lot of targets, especially on DraftKings as well, where you can get 3 running backs in there. But I think that's a good stack. I'm not afraid of using Thomas. He's going to be probably highly owned again. But I think Alvin Kamara and Drew Brees is a great stack this week.
Yes, that about wraps up our stacks. I'll mention a couple other quick ones here. Mariota to Matthews maybe as a GPP stack, or Tyrod Taylor to Deontay Robinson. Another weird one.
Thompson.
Oh, what's that?
Deontay Thompson, right?
Yeah. Is that what I said?
Robinson.
Somebody's drinking.
Oh, yeah. That's
we
what
went full circle. John messed up a name, and then John corrected a name. Let's end it now.
Thanks, buddy.
Those guys go all the way back to high school playing together, so that's a good duo.
Let's go to parting thoughts, guys. What things will you spell correctly this week, John Lee?
Probably not much, to be honest. No, I always kind of wrap this up by recommending something. My recommendation this week is to get on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, you're really doing yourself a disservice in terms of playing this game. It was something I fought my first year in playing DFS, but I think now it's almost a necessity. And it really isn't a whole lot of work. It's social media. If you've got a Facebook account, Twitter is much more bearable because you can block out the people that you don't want to listen to or see. And certainly, there's a few guys even on this panel who you should be following. Ohio State 241, Austin NFL, Ryan Hester. Is 13. That right? 13?
Yeah, that is my name. Yes.
What is it? What's your handle?
At Ryan Hester 13. Sorry, I thought you were reading it off your screen and couldn't read it. Sorry.
No, I can't see it. I can't
see it. Reading glasses.
And Jeff, that's just your name, right?
Yes, just my name.
Jeff Pasquino. So, and of course, I'm at Tip and Pick. Definitely start doing this if you're not already doing it, and I suspect that most of you are. Get on Twitter, start following guys who kind of know what they're talking about, and then add us 5 in there just for good measure.
Just ignore my golf tweets Thursday and Friday.
The Twitter's also a great way to connect with what the beat reporters are saying to get that information kind of before it hits the major news sites. Jeff, what are your parting thoughts?
Yeah, this is a week where, like we said earlier, there's a lot of choices at some positions and not many in others. So if you're doing a build, I would start with the guys you definitely want to get in at the positions that are scarce and fill in the other positions later on. You got plenty of tight ends, you got plenty of running backs. Build those wide receivers, take the quarterback you want, and build from there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It is that sort of construction week. Ryan, what are your parting thoughts?
We were kind of confrontational tonight, and I think I actually liked it. I mean, not that I like to argue with you guys, but I
hated it.
I think it's going to give. But you made some great points too, Jeff. But I think it's going to give all of our listeners, some different angles as opposed to all of us just nodding at each other and agreeing. So check us out on, give us some feedback on YouTube or on Twitter, as John said. And the other thing I'm going to kind of start doing here at the end is I'm going to make a little bit of a call. I'm not going to do a hashtag hot take or anything, but the call this week is Rob Gronkowski multiple touchdowns.
I like it. I like it.
That's not a hot take.
Predicting 2 touchdowns for anyone is still out there a little bit. Come on.
It's not. We're not playing bold claims here. It's
Exactly.
It's solid.
It's conviction.
All right, Ryan.
Not
all right.
hot.
Yeah.
So.
Devin, bring us home here. What's your final parting thought?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say this week is don't overcomplicate it. So especially in cash games, I think there's a lot of don't try and get cute. There's a ton of good plays that we've mentioned throughout this show. So don't try and be the guy who picks some random player that no one's going to have. Like, just this is a week where you can go chalk, and it's a week where even in GPPs, you don't have to differentiate yourself by fading a Steelers Brown and Bell to win a GPP. One of those likely will be on a GPP winning lineup. So don't try to go too just contrarian and throw darts at the walls. There's some weeks for that where there's not a lot of just dynamite plays, which are just home runs, sure things. But this week there's a ton of great plays. So don't try and get too off the wall crazy.
Yep, completely agree. That'll wrap up our show, guys. Thanks to the 4 of you, as always, for joining me for this wild ride that we call the Power Grid. If you want to check out any of our articles or tools or roundtables or matchups, you can find all of that at footballguys.com/DFS. Our DFS package over there, we call it the Insider Pro Plus. It's $35 for the entire season. It covers season long as well as DFS. It also has some interesting stuff about game picking and spreads and things like that you might be interested in. That's going to do it for our show. For Ryan Hester, for John Lee, for Devin Knotts, and for Jeff Pasquino, I am Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out all of our DFS content over at footballguys.com, click on the icon in front of Ryan's face. To subscribe to our Football Guys TV YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click below me now.